Shri Guru Charane Rati Aise Utama Gati Rati Shri Guru Charane Rati Aise Utama Gati Ye prasade pure sarva prasade pure sarva Ye prasade pure sarva ठाकुरान दिलो जे जन्मे जन्मे प्रभु से ठाकुरान दिलो जे जन्मे जन्मे प्रभु से दिव्य ज्ञान हृदय प्रकाशितो दिव्या ज्ञान हृदय प्रकाशितो प्रेम भक्ति जहाँ है आविद्या विनाश जाते प्रेम भक्ति यहाँ है आविद्या विनाश जाते वेद गाय जन्हर चरितो अवेद गाय जन्हर चरितो श्री गुरु करुणा सिंधु आदम जनार बंधु Shri Guru Karuna Sindhu Atma Janara Bandhu Lokanath Lokira Jivana Alokanath Lokira Jivana Aha Prabhu Kuradaya Deho Mori Madhachaya Guru Deva Karadoya Deho Mori Madhachaya Eveyas Gushukri Bhuvana Eveyas Gushukri Bhuvana Aha Prabhu Karadhaya Deha Mari Padachaya Aha Prabhu Karadhaya Deha Mari Padachaya Aha Prabhu Karadhaya Deho Mori Padachaya Aha Prabhu Karadhaya Deho Mori Padachaya Eveyad Gushakri Bhuvana Eveyad Gushakri Bhuvana Gurudev Patita Pavana Srila Gurudev Patita Pavana Jai Gurudev, 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 Jai Gurudev. Jai Jai Gurudev, 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 Jai Gurudev. Jaya Jai Gurudev, 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 Jai Gurudev. Jaya Guru Maharaj, Jaya Guru Maharaj, Jaya Guru Maharaj, Srila Guru Maharaj. Jaya Guru Maharaj, Jaya Guru Maharaj, Jaya Guru Maharaj, Srila Guru Maharaj. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada. Jaya Vaishnava Thakur, Jaya Vaishnava Thakur, Jaya Vaishnava Thakur, Jaya Vaishnava Thakur. Jaya Vaishnava Thakur, Jaya Vaishnava Thakur, Jaya Vaishnava Thakur, Jaya Vaishnava Thakur.
Someone stands like cable for you, cable for your laptop.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. You need to bring. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Gaura Hari Bol. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Gaura Hari Bol. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Gaura Hari Bol. Pal Pramams Varivraj Kacharya Stotra Satshri Shimashila Bhaktivedanta Tripurari Swami Shila Guru Maharaj Ki Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ki Jai Shri Guru Purnima Ki Jai Gaur Pramanam Hari Bol.
Jai Nitil Bhakti Mr. Bhat Paramhamsa Parivata Kacharya Shimachi Isi Bhakti Vedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai Jai Nitil Bhakti Mr. Bhat Paramhamsa Parivata Kacharya Shimachi Bhakti Rakshidari Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai Jai Nitil Bhakti Mr. Bhat Paramhamsa Parivata Kacharya Shimachi Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada Ki Jai Srila Gaurkishora Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai Shri Satchidananda Moy Thakur Bhakti Vinod Ki Jai Shri Gauri Vaishnav Guru Parampara Ki Jai Ananda Koti Vaishnav Ki Jai Brahmsako Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Dvaita Garadhar Shri Basari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Sri Radha Krishna Gopi Sham Kund Radha Kund Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Navadvip Mayapur Dham Ki Jai Shri Chaitra Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai Jamuna Mai Ki Jai Ganga Devi Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai Shri Govardhan Maharaj Ki Jai Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Gaur Premanande Sanatana Goswami Tirobhava Mamutsu Ki Jai. Sit down. Oh yeah. Magyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Swami Shri Bhakti Vedanta Prabhupadaya Te Namaha Guravagyam Shirasi Dritva Shakyavesha Swarupine Hare Krishna Iti Mantrena Paschacha Prachatarane Vishvacharya Prabharjaya Dibya Karunya Murtaye Shri Bhagavata Madhurya Gita Jnana Pradayane Gaura Shri Rupa Siddhanta Saraswati Nishebine Radha Krishna Padam Bhoja Ringaya Gurave Namah Devam Divyatanum Suchanda Varanam Balarka Chelanchitam Sandrananda Puram Sareka Varanam Vairagya Vitamburim Siddhantanidhim Subhakti Lasitam Saraswatanam Varam Vande Tam Shubhadam Madeka Sharanam Yashishwaram Shidaram Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Shrimade Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Ti Namane Shri Varshavanavi Devi Dvaitaya Kripabdaye Krishna Sambandha Vijnana Daine Prabhave Namaha Madhuryo Jvala Premadya Shri Rupanuga Bhaktida Shri Gaura Karuna Shakti Vigrahaya Namostute Namaste Gauravani Shri Murtaye Dinatarine Rupanuga Virudhapa Siddhanta Dvanta Harine Namo Gaura Kishoraya Sakshad Vairagya Murtaye Vipralambara Sambodhe Padambujayate Namaha. Namo Bhakti Vinodaya Satchidananda Namine Gaur Shakti Swarupaya Rupanuga Varayate Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Vande Shri Krishna Chaitanya Nityananda Sahodito Gurudaya Pushpavanto Chitro Sando Tamonudo Vandeham Shri Ramakrishna Abhaya Charana Sako Sukado Paramanando Sundaro Subala Priyo. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radhakanta Namostute Tapta Kancana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishwabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye. Shri Gauri Vaishnava Guru Parampara ki jai, Sanatana Goswami Prabhupada ki jai, Guru Purnima ki jai, Gaur Premanande. Nice to be with all of you. Very warm ceremony. Unexpected to some extent, to a large extent here, but much appreciated. So today is the Guru Purnima, and coincides with an important day in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, that being, as you know, the disappearance day, the Tirobhava of Sri Sanatana Goswami. A word or two about Guru Purnima, maybe in order to begin with. There should be a day, you would think. There's a Purnima for everybody, so for the Guru as well. There is a popular idea that when the Gautama Buddha got up from sitting, you may know that he became enlightened with regard to his novel Buddhist perspective. He was actually a Hindu, but in order to attain his state of nirvana, he sat underneath a tree, the Bodhi tree. I often say, well, that's all he did. He just sat there. So it's so easy, you would think, but it's not easy to sit, is it? Fortunately, thanks to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we can dance instead of sitting, which is a lot easier, and move around and do many other things, all in trance, using all of the senses in the service of Rishikesh. This is bhakti. But at any rate, he got up from his sitting and he went and taught his first 5 students. His first sermon was on the Purnima, and it became the Guru Purnima, and it's thought that it expanded then to the Jains and the Hindus who also adopted it. There is, however, another idea within Hinduism, whether it came afterward or was in place beforehand, no one can say. But the idea within Hinduism is that it's the birth date of Krishna Dvaipayana Vyas, which would be a little hard to trace out historically, but he, of course, is the legendary editor, really, manifester after Brahma in literary form, with an editorial board that he had, manifester in literary form of the sacred text, the revelation, the Shruti, the Smriti. So, an important person, said to be a Vaish avatar of Bhagwan. But it's celebrated throughout India in all, so many related to Hindu, if you will, disciplines, even as Buddhism is. But for us, as I say, it takes a special significance, at least in my mind, and that with regard to the fact, as I said, that it corresponds with Sanatana Goswami's disappearance. Sanatana Goswami is an extremely important figure in Gaudiya Vaishnavism. I can recall that as a young man, and Sanatana Prabhu only lived to be 70 years old. Rupa Goswami, his younger brother, 71. I'm 73, so I used to think Prabhupada was quite old at 70 when I met him. But as he said, young at heart, we all are, like young boys, he used to say, or girls. But Sanatan, in my youth, when I was an early member of Prabhupada's mission, always, for some reason, and probably for sentimental reasons, stuck out in my mind as the most prominent, as I thought of them, of the founding acharyas, the 6 Goswamis, the Shastra gurus, who penned, if you will, the Bhakti Shastras that our Sampradaya, our lineage, follows. I looked to him, and when I had the opportunity the first time to go to Braj, go to India, Mayapur, and Vrindavan, Prabhupada invited me. And in Vrindavan, I very much took a liking to, affinity for the place where Sanatan used to do his bhajan in the earlier part of his life in Braj, where he would cook that bread, kind of bread, unsalted, unleavened bread. And they still make that there, in remembrance of him. And he would offer that to his deity, Radha Madan Mohan. I took very much a liking to that place, so I always used to go there whenever I went to Vrindavan and engage in bhajan there. Like I say, it was somewhat of a sentiment, I think, on my part, but later I found out that there were actually significant reasons for that. As I became more acquainted with the tradition and the person of Sanatana Goswami and so forth, who is the elder of the founding acharyas, the elder brother of Rupa Goswami. He was about 5 years older than Rupa Goswami and a couple of years younger than Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Born in 1488, and he left after 70 years. And he comes from, along with Rupa, and of course it's Rupa, Sanatana, and Vallabha. These were 3 brothers. Those were not their original names. Those were names that were given by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, it seems, when he came to Ramkeli. But these 3 brothers, and then the son of Vallabha, Shijiva Goswami. So they were all one family, 1, 2, 3. Well, amongst the 6 Goswamis, that's 3. Vallabha's not included amongst 6 Goswamis, but he's included as an exalted, worshipful, venerable devotee. He was not involved, that's to say, in the work and the service, important service that the others were involved in, work that was particularly asked of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's service, I should say, asked Sanatana Goswami to carry out, which the others seemed to then follow his lead. He asked him in Benares. We'll get to that as we go through a little bit of his life story, if you will. The family came originally from South India, I think Karnataka, Brahmin family, and at some point they relocated in Bengal, in Ramkeli. Ramkeli was at the time of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu the Muslim capital in what is Bengal today. So Rupa and Sanatana were born there, and Vallabha, Jiva Goswami, as I mentioned, and they were Hindus and Brahmins, and so they were Vaishnavas. Indeed, prior to being employed by the Muslim ruling political party, the Nawab Hussain Shah employed them. Prior to that, they set up their residence in such a way that it would be mindful of, or would remind them of Vrindavan. They had a kund, they named, Radha Kund, and maybe they had a hill they named Govardhan, and so on and so forth. And they were from early in their life devotees of Krishna. But and Sanatana in particular was very studious. He was more, I would say, philosophical than Rupa Goswami, and you can see that from his writing. Jiva Goswami, of course, became very philosophical himself, but amongst the two leading brothers, Rupa Sanatana, the leaders of the six Goswamis, if you will, he was more philosophical, and he was very attached to the Srimad Bhagavatam. There's a verse I wrote, let me look it up here so if I can find it, that he penned with regard to his affinity for the Bhagavad. The Bhagavad is, of course, this the central book of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, from which all the other texts more or less flow like rivers from the ocean of the Bhagavad. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu considered it like his own heart. In his mind, the Bhagavad was a natural commentary on the sutras of Vyasa, which meant that the Gaudiyas, in his opinion, didn't need a commentary on the sutras. Of course, later Baladev Vidibhusan did write one, and that was very important and did a lot for Gaudiya Vaishnavism by doing that. Because of that, today, when the different schools of Vedanta are mentioned, Gaudiya Vaishnavism will be mentioned. Kashmiri Shaivism won't be mentioned, Paramahamsa Yogananda won't be mentioned, and so many other Hindu teachers, gurus, and lineages, and so forth. If you actually have a lineage that has a commentary on the sutras, we have, it's notable, let us say. So this is the contribution of Baladev. There were circumstances surrounding that, some of you know that, but the Bhagavad, and rightfully so, if you study carefully, is a commentary on the sutras, and it's mentioned in other Puranas. I believe in the Garuda Purana, it said, what is it? Sutroyam, Artoyam, Brahma Sutranam, Artoyam. So the meaning of the sutras or Vyasa, which are like cryptic notes, like he was doing shorthand. You can't figure it out, and then what the sutras are about, the commentaries, are taking those short notes and drawing meaning from them based on the Upanishads and other texts, principally the Upanishads. So the different interpretations of them. But we consider that the Bhagavatam is the longhand work of Vyasa. He put it in, he wrote some crib notes, and then he took the notes and wrote it longhand in the Bhagavad. So anyway, it's a very important central book to our tradition, as you know, and it was very, very dear to Sanatana Goswami. Here is the verse of Sanatana that he composed regarding the Bhagavatam. Do you know it? Madeka Bando Mat Sangin Mad Guru Mad Mahadana Manish Taraka Mad Bhagya Madananda Namostite. Very nice, he says. So, O holy Bhagavad, Madeka Bando Matsangin, you are my Sangha, my only company, from whom I get solace, my only friend, Mad Guru, my only guru, Mad Mahadhana, the greatest wealth, and my riches, the great treasure of my life. Man Nistaraka Madbhagya, the emblem of my Madbhagya, my great and good fortune. And the very, he says, Madananda, the very form of Ananda, Ananda taking shape. Nigamakopatoro Galitam Palam Sukum Kalam Radrava Sambitam Pibata Bhagavatam Rasam Malayam Muhuraho Rasika Bhuvi Bhavuka. This is the third verse of Bhagavad. It very beautifully, accurately describes its content that corresponds here with what Sanatana is saying. Madhananda Mostute, my obeisances to you, the very form of ecstasy, of rasa itself, the ripened fruit it is. Nigama kalpataro. If you have a wish-fulfilling tree, that's pretty good. But if you get the ripened fruit from it, you're really doing well, right? So that is the Bhagavatam. And ripened fruit is galitam phalam. So it made itself very easy to pick because it fell to the ground. You don't have to climb up and there'd be some possibility of falling on a broken branch, slipping. In bhakti, there's no falling. You never fall. You may stop practicing. Your practicing may be interrupted by your anarthas, but however far you've gone, that's how far you've gone, and that doesn't change. What does the Gita say? Neham vikramanashosti pratyabhayana vidite swalpam api asya dharma swalpam api asya dharmasya mate mato bhayat swalpam api, a little bit, swalpam, just a little bit of progress in this, because it is nirguna. Yoga, Gyan, these are governed by Sattva Guna, which is a good thing, but in and of itself, it cannot afford us transcendence, transcending the gunas altogether. But bhakti comes from the nirguna. And just a little progress in that, we said, Gita says, will save you from the greatest danger. You'll be a what do they say, like a numbered person, Krishna will always remember you. You may forget Krishna, but he won't forget you. If some devotee has touched your life and you've responded appropriately with feeling and tried to catch on to those ideas that he or she embodies, to understand the teachings, the philosophy, the theology, it's complex and so forth, sort it out amongst so many other thoughts in the world today that are pressing on us and press themselves on us and so forth. Don't think that effort will ever, that you make will go in vain. Even if the clouds of other ideas get in the way for some time, this will come back. If not in this life, in another life. So nigamakopataro galitam phalam. The fruit has made it easy. There's no falling in bhakti. In every other path, there's falling for sure, unless there's some bhakti. Some bhakti, they'll definitely be falling. Ariyakachjena paramapadam tada patanti adho naditayusmarangraya. So Sanatana Prabhu, he had a great feeling for the Bhagavatam. It's said that he was worshiping the deity of Krishna and in his home, and at night he took a rest one night, and in a dream, a Brahmin boy, I believe, came and gave him the Bhagavatam, gave him a copy of the Bhagavatam. Maybe this was the first time he came in touch with it, and he woke up and he was like, and the boy said, read this, and all of your and your study of this alone will be complete and comprehensive. This book alone, no need for any other book. We don't need to burn other books, but excuse me. So he woke from the dream and he was startled by that dream, but disappointed that it was only a dream. Only to find that after falling back asleep and waking up in the morning, a boy came by, a Brahmin boy, and gave him the Bhagavad. I told him, read this book. That's all you need. So, in a mysterious way, he received the Bhagavad text, and he was a great scholar, so much so that people from, in all of his spare time, after he became engaged in the government service, which was something that was a little, I would say, hard to avoid. If the ruling Muslim, and if he's ruling over a large area, powerful fellow, decided he wanted you as, in his cabinet, it was cabinet or the guillotine probably, or whatever the method was at the time. So they acquiesced, Rup Sanatan. Not that they were afraid necessarily, but ultimately we can see that as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's arrangement, because in those circumstances they had opportunity to interact with people, aristocratic people, and learn different languages, become somewhat cosmopolitan, if you will. And although they they gave all that up without a moment's hesitation. In fact, they longed to give that up. It's very peculiar. They had all these things going for them, right? Materially speaking, they were prestigious, had a prestigious material position, but they longed to give that up and join Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who they heard about, who was in Nadia, who had gone to Puri, had taken sannyas. They longed to join him. They wrote him a letter. He wrote back. He told them that you should remain. You see, he had to be a little politically astute here to understand the situation. He wrote them back. He said, you should stay in the Nawab's Hussain Shah's service like a parakiya lover, a paramour lover, an illicit lover who has a husband, and in order to exercise excessive caution that her husband might not find out that she has a lover, she's very attentive to everything in the household. So he told, you should be like that with regard to the king. So you can have a paramour relationship with me. I mean, it's not as some have developed, some schools associated with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, thinking that he is an object for Gopi Bhav. No, that's not the case. But within the fact that he is Radha and Krishna combined, then by his grace, Krishna coming to taste the parakiya of Radha, it can be tasted. But from a practical point of view, he was telling them, be careful with the king. You can't just leave. In fact, when Mahaprabhu did return to Bengal for the first time, he went for some reason to Ramkeli. And no one could understand why. But he was, of course, well received, and he was followed by lots of people. I guess you could say it was on the way to Vrindavan. That might be a reason for his coming there. But this was the first time that Rup Sanatan had the opportunity to meet him, and influenced by his association, shortly thereafter, of course, Rupa Goswami managed to get out of the government service. Sanatan tried, but he was arrested. Sanatan at the time, however, prior to his being arrested and prior to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's departing, he took the opportunity, boldly, if you will, but in affection and with serving disposition, he was so audacious as to instruct Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Well, he said, I don't think it will be good for you to go to Vrindavan with all these people. people were following him in mass, right? And even the local magistrate was concerned about it. Who is this Hindu mendicant? But it's very interesting because at the time, you have your Muslims and your Hindus, and they have their differences, obviously, and there's some animosity on some level. But the local magistrate was nonetheless taken by the obvious spirituality of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So he didn't want to restrict him in any way, which he might have otherwise. In other words, he recognized, well, whether you're a Hindu or a Sufi, Muslim, or whatever, if you've got these qualities, you figured it out. If you are exhibiting the godly qualities, wherever you got them from, doesn't matter. They had that he had that kind of essential spiritual sensibility, which is so much lacking in the world today, with so many fundamentalist forms of religion being so prominent, whether it be Gaudiya Vaishnavism, even the Buddhists have that. Certainly the Christians are very good at that, and so on and so forth. It's very unbecoming, very misrepresentative of what all these great religious traditions are about at heart. But anyway, so Sanatana advised Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and this is a kind of a twofold piece of advice. Given the political climate, it would not be good to go across the whole country with all these people following you. You're just going to make a big show, and while right here locally, the local magistrate may have not tried to obstruct you. That may not be the case going forward. And also from a spiritual point of view, to go into Vrindavan with a big following, that's probably not the best idea. That was very bold to say that to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. You should go humbly into Vrindavan. And this is coming from a person, Sanatana, who later, and appropriately so, Jiva Goswami wrote about him and his brother. Pranams to them, Rup Sanatana, who are famous in Braj, famous in Mathura as devotees. I mean, to be a devotee in Braj is wanting to be recognized as a devotee, to be a famous devotee in Braj. This is very extraordinary. And so, and they were, and we'll come to that as we get to that part of this of the story. But he advised Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, don't go to Vrindavan in this way. Mahaprabhu took his advice. Is it okay if I learn something from you? You think I'm here to teach, but I'm here to learn. So I'm very attentive, watching and listening, if I can learn something from all of you. And this is a good example. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the Samasti Guru of the whole Sampradaya, and he's learning from his disciple, taking instruction from his disciple, Sanatana Goswami. We should not be so proud as to think we cannot learn from anyone and anything, at any time, in any place. As Pujapad Sridhar used to say, we're all students forever in this school. This school goes on and on and on and on and on and on. It's a song. Excuse me. And although it's eternal, I've made this point recently, it's a point I like very much. Although it's eternal, our ideal, and that we ourselves are, for that matter, and our ideal is such, the Leelas of Krishna are such, eternal. There's no past, present, future, it's just eternal time. Still, the nature of the eternity is very peculiar because it's always growing. Always growing and nourishing itself, and new leelas. How can there be new leelas in eternity? Don't try to think too hard about it. This the nature of the. It's a what would you call it? A conundrum or not a spiral. No, it's a fact. Of course, now I've said this before. It's worth noting that the very word Brahman, which is a name, popular name for the absolute, comes from the root, how would you say, brim, which means to grow, and cause other things to grow. So it's a growing thing. It's a growing eternity. The prem of Radha is described as contradictory, full, and always expanding at the same time. So the implication, in the very least, is there's room for us, for new recruits to enter there. So we're fortunate. Excuse me. But yes, so Sanatana Mahaprabhu learned from. It's not the only, and you should, if you look at the story, the Leela Mahaprabhu, it's not the only devotee, disciple, student that he learned from. So we should try to follow his example. Be open to learning from anyone and everyone. But at that time, at any rate, Mahaprabhu did not go on to Vrindavan, and he returned to Jagannath Puri. Later, he again went, and by himself, or with one assistant, to Vrindavan. And I believe it must have been on the way that he met Sanatana Goswami, on the way back, I think. Yes. He went to Vrindavan, and Rupa Goswami had gotten out of the government service. Sanatana had been tried to, he didn't try to get out of the government service, but he couldn't bring himself to report for work because he was too absorbed in relishing the Bhagavatam, something like that. So the Nawab had him arrested anyway, but he managed to escape. And meanwhile, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu went to Vrindavan. He returned from Vrindavan. He met Rupa Goswami on the way. That's arguably why he left Vrindavan. He couldn't wait for Rupa to get there. He left and met him, instructed him, and then he met Sanatana in Benares. So at that time, Sanatana Goswami was traveling on the Indian the countryside of Bharat, and he was dressed like a Sufi, with a beard and dressed appropriately, rather than as a Gaudiya Vaishnava, that he might travel more safely, given that he was an escapee, criminal by the government's standards. You try to appreciate how difficult, a situation that would be. And he's walking, of course, on foot, and on the way also. At his first stop along the way, he had, I think, an assistant came with him, or wanted to come with him. And when he stayed at a dharamshala, right, the owner was accustomed to stealing from his clients. And he had an astrologer who worked with him. So he talked with the astrologer, and it was determined that these guys, Sanatana and whoever was with him at the time, I forget, had some gold coins. So he treated them very nicely, and his plan was to kill him at night and take the gold coins. But Sanatana, he was very astute, so he was treating him so nicely, he thought, something's wrong here. Ati bhakti lakan chora, it said. Too much bhakti is the lakshan, the sign of a thief. Too much bhakti, I don't know about that. It's not a cheap thing. It can make it show. Pranams, Guru Maharaj, Dhanyavad. You can say all the right things and so forth. But you have to look a little deeper, see what's really there. Right? So Sanatana thought, something's up here, and then he asked his assistant, and the assistant said, well, I have this gold coin. Oh, so I think there were 9 gold coins or something like that, 7 or 8 or 9. So he took them, and he gave, I think, say there were 9, he gave 8 of them to the innkeeper, and then he gave 1 to the other fellow who would come with him and sent him in the other direction. So the innkeeper was, of course, amazed by Sanatana Goswami's ability to figure out his plan, and upon figuring it out, to give him the coins. This is a real extreme example of Sharanagati, which is the center of which is Gopritve Varanam Tata. Krishna will protect me. Off he went with nothing. No money. Of course, he didn't set out with any money, but his assistant at the time brought some. Anyway, so he went onward, and he met, I think, a relative, maybe a brother-in-law or something, who was surprised to meet him and how his life had changed and was in danger and so forth. He gave him a pashmina, very, very nice wool chadar, like this, expensive, warm, very light weight, but very warm. And off he went. And when he got to Benares, it so happened that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was there, staying at the house of Chandrasekhar. Tapan Mishra was there doing the cooking. And out of his omniscience, Mahaprabhu told Chandrasekhar, there's someone outside. Go and bring him in. And he opened the door and he said, he came back and said, there's only a Sufi out there, some Sufi standing out there. So Mahaprabhu said, no, that's the one, I want to bring him in. So Sanatana Prabhu came in and Mahaprabhu affectionately embraced him, which was kind of overwhelming and embarrassing to Sanatana Goswami, because he wasn't properly dressed in his own estimation. And he had been traveling a long distance and so on and so forth. But Mahaprabhu's affection for him was so deep that he nothing could get in the way of his of expressing that affection. And then he told him, go and bathe in the Ganga, and he had Chandrasekhar give him some cloth so he could dress now as a Vaishnava and so forth. And he went, and he came back. And Mahaprabhu looked at him and didn't say anything, and then he could understand, oh, Mahaprabhu doesn't like my expensive chadar, I'm a beggar now. So he went to the back of the Ganga, and he found a fellow who had a torn quilt and said, can I trade you? And the man said, what, are you making a joke of me or something like that? Yeah. He said, no, I really want to trade this. So he did. Mahaprabhu was very pleased with his overt example of renunciation. And this is from, having lived the life of a king, basically. He was the second in command of the whole of the Bengal, practically. Meeting with, as I said, royalty, in the Muslim administration and so forth. The kind of social gatherings they had and so forth. Chaktivam Turnamashesa Manalapati. They gave all this up. And they didn't have to try. In effect, their employment in the government equipped them, in some ways, materially speaking, to be, aside from their spiritual, internal status, equipped them externally to be who they are in Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Educated, authors, capable as they were in Braj, eventually to attract the attention of kings, their patronage, and so on and so forth. They were very sophisticated people. That helped them, we could say, to some extent. From an external point, from an internal point of view, of course, they were the Sanatana Goswami is identified with the Parakya Bhav that is so central to Mahaprabhu's tradition. He is described in Ganadesh Deepika of Kavi Karnapur to be Labanga Manjari, and he has, like Das Goswami, who refers to in his own writing as its dear friend, Raghunath Das Goswami, they follow the lead of Vishakha Gopi. So that is, of course, a whole subject, but it's very central, as I say, to what Gaudiya Vaishnavism is about in terms of its highest ideal, and So from an internal point of view and from an external point of view, they were very qualified to be examples for us and architects of the Sampradaya, leaders. Unlike many of the devotees of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they set an example of how to actually practice. They were all beyond practice, but they set an example for us. What is it said? Sad Goswami Astakam. Sankhya Purvaka Nama Gana Natibi. Well, Sanatana went on from Benares to Braj, and there he lived his life as in bhajan, circumambulating Govardhan, paying obeisances to Vaishnavas, chanting around Sankhya Purvaka Nama Gana Natibi on the Japamala, so forth. Mahaprabhu told him in Benares, and this is an instruction given to Sanatana that was then by him, the leader, passed on to Rupa Jiva Goswami, Gopal Bhatta Goswami, and so forth. The instructions were fourfold. Go to Vrindavan and excavate the places of Krishna's pastimes, the Leela Stalis. So when Mahaprabhu himself had gone there, he felt this is Radhakund, this is Shyamakund, for example, which at the time was not known. They were not known to be Leela Stalis of Radha and Krishna by the residents. So the Vrindavan, the Dham, is a big subject, but of course it excuse me, its influence, its effulgence, its appearance, its prakat, its manifestation, the best of it may recede at times to the background, and devotees may come and uncover it and so forth. So this is what happened at this time. Under Mahaprabhu's instruction, he had gone there and he saw, oh, this is Vrindavan. We need to uncover it and bring out all the places of Krishna's pastimes that people can reside here, remember them, and so forth. It's a very, meditative land. Every step, Krishna did this here, Krishna did this there, Krishna did this here. So to know those steps and what he did where and whatnot, this was all arose out of the bhava of Sanatana Rupa Goswami. They said, they felt that, and people honored that. That's how much they honored Rupa Sanatana. You're saying that when the king will come and build a ghat there and build a temple there, out of sandstone, imported from Jaipur. So they just gave the word. This is Brahmakund, this is Radhakund, and the patronage of the monarchy was at their feet, so to speak. So much they did for Vrindavan. But this is that one instruction, fourfold. So excavate the places of Krishna's pastimes. I mean, how do you do that? Not that you get an excavator and dig it up or something. How do you do that? So Mahaprabhu empowered them to do that. And he told them also to establish the worship of the deity there. Sanatana established the deity of Radha Madan Mohan, Rupa Goswami, Radha Govinda, and so forth. Radha Govinda, Radha Madan Mohan, Radha Gopinath. These were the three main temples in their time. And all of Braj started to become centered around them, especially Radha Govinda, kind of the hub, the yoga pit. And he also told them, there's two instructions: to excavate the places of Krishna's pastimes and to establish the deity worship there, deities, and to write in two types of books. He told Sanatana in particular, books of Gaudiya Siddhanta, the teachings, which Mahaprabhu had imparted to him for quite some time there in Benares. Reiterate that. Put what I've told you into books. Sanatana was quite a scholar, as I've mentioned. When Mahaprabhu instructed him in the course of, I think, a couple of months in Benares, at the end, as it's related in Chaitanya Charitamrita, he posed a question to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. It just shows his curious philosophical mind. He said that I heard that in Jagannath Puri, you explained the Atmarama verse, a famous verse of the Bhagavatam that's very central to its understanding, in how many different ways? 18, anyway, a number of different ways to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya was the brother of Vidya Vachaspati, who was the guru of Rupa and Sanatana, even Jiva Goswami, taught them so many things. That means different disciplines also they learned at that time. All the leading philosophies of the day, Sankhya, Karma, Mimamsa, Vedanta, Nyaya, and so forth. But anyway, he was curious. He said, could you repeat those like 18 different meanings of one verse that you did to Sanatana Goswami? And Mahaprabhu said, oh, so impudent of me to speak to the Bhattacharya in that way. He's one of my gurus, elder, only has a well-wishing for me, but in some moment of madness, I said something. I can't remember what it is. But if you like, I'll explain the verse. And then he explained it in 61 different ways to Sanatana Goswami. It's all related there in brief in Chaitanya Charitamrita. But this was another indication of the temperament of Sanatana. He liked that kind of thing, right? Very much. But he asked him to write books on philosophy of Gaudiya Vaishnavism and to also establish through writing, I believe it was, or establish Vaishnavachar. What is the standard of behavior for our group? Mahaprabhu was starting a sampradaya, and he's starting it by talking to Sanatana Goswami, who I like to think of as the architect of the whole sampradaya. The idea came from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and under his instruction, he started to write out the blueprint, how to do that. So what is our teaching going to be? We have to make some books about that. Who's our deity going to be? What's our place going to be? And what's our behavior going to be? How are we going to do all the things that you're supposed to do in life as a human being from the Gaudiya perspective? Whether it be marriage or ordinary things as such, to well, we chant on beads, 108 beads, right? Tulsi beads that are shaped the way they are, with one bead, the head bead or whatever, the Krishna bead, because that's what Sanatana Goswami said to do. He wrote about that in Bhari Bhakti Vilas. This is how you do it. He gave these things. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was said to chant on a string with knots on it, chanting. Rupa Goswami describes him this way, singing out loud and moving his fingers on knots on a string. So you see the beads that we're chanting. This is Sanatana Goswami. He's given us this. Just one example. So he very much fulfilled that, or rendered that service asked of him by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And the services given to him, as I say, he was their leader, and they were passed on to the other Goswamis. Rupa Goswami wrote books. He established Radha Govinda Temple. He also excavated the places of Krishna's pastimes, and so on and so forth. Radha Raman deity was established and appeared for Gopal, to Gopal Bhatta Goswami. His temple was established, and so on. So anyway, on to Vrindavan. Sanatana Goswami went, but at some point he left Vrindavan to go to Jagannath Puri to once again have the darshan of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So he walked from Vrindavan to Jagannath Puri. And isn't it? Yes. And he was very much, Mahaprabhu was very pleased to see him and introduce him to different devotees. He was when he had the opportunity, there was a couple of occasions when he got to introduce Rup and Sanatan to other associates of his, literary giants, poets, rasikas, and so forth. And their humility would stand out. just stand out, and everybody would be awed by them. They're good qualities, and despite them, their humility, not that all the devotees of Mahaprabhu weren't humble, but the humility of Rupa Sanatana, it made Chaitanya Mahaprabhu weep. It broke his heart to see how humble they were. They so exemplified it, as did Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, following their example, writing Chaitanya Charitamrita means that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as seen by Rupa Sanatana Goswami. That's what the Chaitanya Charitamrita is. And how humble he is there, how he speaks there about himself. So very touching. Sanatana Goswami endeared himself that much more to Chaitanya. I mean, his humility, an example. Here's the Jagannath temple. This is Sanatana Goswami. God, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, embraced him, couldn't hold himself back. Typically, if you want to go before God, you're going to get dressed up. Even when we were kids, we dressed up to go to church, to go to mass. As a Catholic, kids get dressed up, polish your shoes or whatever, and there you are. Don't look at the girls. Pay attention. And here he was, as I said in Benares earlier, dressed like a Sufi, and having traveled by foot all across India, long distance, and Mahaprabhu just embraced him. Even Chandrasekhar couldn't recognize this. Some guy, some hippie out there is what he basically felt like. Some nutty, Sufi. Not that there aren't good Sufis, there are, but Mahaprabhu just couldn't hold himself back. Couldn't resist him. So pure he was, is the point. But how he thought of himself, such a contrast. It's just startling. And the example I'm thinking of is in Jagannath Puri, how he wanted to, I think maybe Mahaprabhu called for him or something like that, and he came to meet Mahaprabhu, but if he went the shortest route, then he would have gone past the priests in the temple, who incidentally were all, what are those kind of Brahmins called? In the Shankar? Smarta Brahmins. They were Shankarites. There's 4 moths or monasteries of Shankaracharya, and the Govardhan Moth, as it's called, is in Jagannath Puri. It is and their monastery, the priests from that order of Mayavadis, these are, they take care of Lord Jagannath. They run the temple there. Still to this day, they run the temple. Now that happens to be the one moth of Shankar where there's an influence of bhakti, where they factor in bhakti, sattviki bhakti, we could say, to embellish their gyan and achieve their desired results more readily. Of course, our teaching, the teaching of the Bhagavatams, without that, they won't attain the result. So they're the only ones that get mukti, but not the kind of mukti within Shankar Sampradaya that we would be interested in at the same time. We call it Brahma Sayuja, kind of a spiritual suicide, if you will. But these were the priests. And Sanatana felt if he took the shorter route, he would pass by the priests. And he was so impure that it would be an offense. And so he took the long route, which meant he had to walk along the sand on the beach, which was scorching hot in the midday. He walked the whole way, and his feet were burned on the bottom, but he didn't notice it. Just thinking, how can I be pure enough to come before Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? He's asked me to come and see him and give me his darshan. When he came to Puri, it should be known, this is an important point, when he first arrived in Puri, on his travels, he had contacted some disease from drinking contaminated water that caused open sores to break out on his body. And he was afraid that if when he saw Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, because Mahaprabhu was so crazy with his affection, that he would embrace him and his body was full of open sores, and I can't allow that to happen. It was his thought. So as he approached, he was originally going to have the darshan of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, but as he approached, he contacted this physical problem. Then he reasoned that he couldn't have the darshan of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu might try to embrace him. Therefore, he thought, I will throw myself under the Rathayatra cart, a form of Vaishnava suicide. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu interrupted him, knowing with his omniscience, and he told him that I have many things I want to do through your body. It's not yours to do that with. And he embraced him, and all the sores went away. And he introduced him, as I say, to other devotees, Ramananda Roy, and so on and so forth. And they saw his humility. So they really stood out, even amongst all the devotees of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But he returned to Vrindavan. His probably most celebrated literary work, is the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, the beautiful story, 2 cantos. First canto is Narad is the protagonist, I guess you could say, and who is an expansion of Madhu Mangal from Braj, and through him we find out that the gopis' love is the highest, most intense ideal through Narad. And then the second half, so what is the highest love? And then where does that exist? Where do you go to, where do you, like, you say the gopis' love is the highest, and it's attainable. Well, where are you going to find it? I mean, it's not in Vaikuntha. Narayan doesn't have gopis, doesn't have Lakshmis in the plural. So there must be another abode, another place. This is, I've said before, central to the point of our philosophy that's so much of a foundation stone. Krishna's tu Bhagavan Swayam. If Krishna is just an avatar of Narayan, then he will go to Vaikuntha and there'll be no Sakirasa, there'll be no Madhurya Rasa there. It's not available with Narayan. He might show Krishna avatar on Janamastami in Vaikuntha, show that Leela, like when Gopakumar went there. He showed it one time. Oh, very nice. And the other people, the residents, they see that, oh, that's a side of Narayan. But it's not something they can actually participate in, become gopis. You can't deal with Narayan like that. He manifests some people to do that with. But we're all his servants here. So if Krishna is the avatar of Narayan, then, well, there's no prospect for Gopi Bhav, Gopa Bhav in Vaikuntha. But if he's the source of Narayan, then he has his own abode. It's called Mahavaikuntha. In some Puranas, you can find it. Goswamis have found it for sure. That was their task, really. Sanatana was, as I mentioned, to write such books. And the Brihad Bhagavatamrita is one of them, of course. So the first part of the book is the highest ideal of bhakti, the Gopi Bhav, and where's the place that you can find it? Where can it be experienced? That's the Goloka Mahatmya, the glories of Golok in the story. The protagonist there is, of course, also a Saka. His name is Gopakumar, or Sarup, Narmasaka, like Madhu Mangal in Goloka, showing the way of Gopi Bhav, that pointing to it. So it's probably the most important book. Prabhupada said, no one can become Krishna conscious without reading Brihad Bhagavatamrita. He wrote that in this Chaitanya Charitamrita commentary. He seemed very moved by the book, and it's very charming in the format in which it's written, and which at the same time includes so many important, significant teachings. And then, we don't know, Hari Bhakti Vilas, is Sanatana the author? Yes, see? Brighu knows. He's been working on the translation of that for a decade now or so. And I think it's clear that these books were written, by the six Goswamis. Gopal Bhatta constructed some notes, for example, that Jiva Goswami put into longhand as the Satsandarbha. Gopal Bhatta Goswami had some role to play also in Sanatana's book, Hari Bhakti Vilas, which tells you how to chant on beads, how many beads, where to get them, and with a bead bag with a hole in it, the whole thing, it's all there, believe it or not. Given some shape, as they say, to the Sampradaya. So eventually, Sanatana returned to Vrindavan. He lived there for 43 years. And after Chaitanya Mahaprabhu passed away, Raghunath Das Goswami, whom he would have met when he was in Puri, much younger than him, and who was under the care of Sarup Damodar and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself in Jagannath Puri. When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu passed away, and Sarup Damodar did as well, then Raghunath Das Goswami decided to go to Vrindavan and jump off of Govardhan Hill, another form of Vaishnava suicide. Excuse me. So in his plight, that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is gone and Sarup Damodar is gone. Oh, there's no meaning to my life anymore. But when he got to Vrindavan, it was Sanatana Goswami that stopped him. And he penned a very beautiful verse in Vilapa Kusumanjali, Raghunath Das Goswami, where he pays tribute to Sanatana Goswami. And it would appear that it was, what is said there is based on the fact that Sanatana, telling his own story, right, and his thoughts of committing suicide by throwing himself under the wrath cart of Jagannath, and how Mahaprabhu reacted and so forth. It would appear that Sanatana Goswami grabbed hold of him and told him, you can't do that. As Mahaprabhu wanted to use my body and do things through me, I also want to use yours to extend and do justice to what Mahaprabhu asked me to do. We're all in this together. And how's that verse go? Vairagi Yug Bhakti Rasam Prayatna Abhayam Mamanabipsam Kripambudi Yas Paradukaduki, he said. So he says, it's peculiar. He says, Vairagi Yug Bhakti Rasam. He's paying his obeisances to Sanatana Goswami. He says, who made me drink the bhakti rasa that was mixed with or tinged with renunciation. It's peculiar because it would be hard to find a person who was more renounced than Raghunath Das Goswami. The story of his renunciation in Jagannath Puri is astounding. Astounding. How he lived like a yati, like a renunciate, and impressed Chaitanya Mahaprabhu with his renunciation. And he learned about Rag Bhakti, at least to some extent, from Sarup Damodar. Raghunath Das wanted to have the darshan of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu directly, but Mahaprabhu said to him, you want me to give you some instructions, but I'm taking instructions from Sarup Damodar. He's teaching me. He's the Lita Saki. He's teaching me how to enter into Radha Bhav. He didn't say that per se, but that's the fact. Another example. And so I'm not trying to keep you away from anything by telling you to listen to him. I listen to him. So you should hear from instructions from Sarup Damodar, who told him, don't eat fancy food, don't dress in fancy clothes, so on and so forth. Don't do Gramikatana Shunibe, don't listen to this village talk and rumors unless it's the brunch rumors. That's another thing in the brunch Leela. There you can have your gram village kata, but not of ordinary people. And in your mind, do manasi seva, worship Radha and Krishna. Hmm? Mahaprabhu told him this. He said, and the details you'll get from Sanatana. I'll tell you that much. Or excuse me, from Sarup Damodar. But how long after that Sarup Damodar passed away, it's hard to say, and how much instruction Raghunath Das Goswami got from, Sarup Damodar, we can't say. But what he says in this verse that I just cited is significant. His renunciation was clearly intact, in place. It was extreme. But Vairagya Bhakti Rasam Prayatnam, he says there's another meaning of Vairagya. Vairag, this is also given in by Prabodhananda Saraswati in his Chaitanya Chandramrita, a special kind of raga. Vairagya, he takes it like this, special kind of rag. Vai mean like special. He says, Vairagya Bhakti Rasam Prayatnaya. So we could look at it like that. Sanatana Goswami made me drink the nectar of a special kind of raga. I was unwilling. I was going to commit suicide, but he interrupted me. He stopped me. And he imparted to me so much of what Sarup Damodar wanted to impart, perhaps didn't have the time entirely, because it's only after this, after his coming to Braj, after his being very compassionately and affectionately embraced by Sanatana Goswami and instructed by him, that he wrote all of the books. He didn't write those books in Jagannath Puri. He wrote them all in Vrindavan. Vilap Kusumanjali is one verse from it I just cited. Oh, so many important books. His books, as Sanatan's books, tend to focus on the Sambandha Gyan, and Rupa Goswami's on the Abhideya, on a conceptual orientation and the way, the path, and then the goal. So Raghunath Das Goswami's books writing so deeply with feeling about the goal. All this came out in Vrindavan. We could say all this came from Sanatana Goswami, from this beautiful verse of Raghunath Das Goswami in Vilapa Kusumanjali. We have no evidence that of the extent that he attained, the extent of what he wrote about in Vrindavan, in Jagannath Puri. We have evidence to believe that he gained that all in Braj from Sanatana Goswami, who he said is Paradukaduki Kripambudhi. He mentions him as being particularly compassionate. And it's said in Bhakti Ratnakar that of all of the devotees of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, no one was more compassionate and known for being the embodiment of compassion than Sanatana Goswami. And he was the elder of all of the founding acharyas. And he lived in Braj, like I say, for so many years. He founded the Madan Mohan temple. Krishna appeared to him there. So it's a story most of you know. Got the help of a salt merchant. The deity, he had the deity of Madan Gopal. He was hanging from a tree and offering him that bread, unsalted, what would you call it? Unleavened bread, something like. And the deity said, "Can't you at least give me a little salt or something?" And then he said, "Well, first you want salt, then you want butter, then I don't have anything here." And so then he went that night. There was a merchant with a boat full of salt, taking it for trade, and he got stuck on a sandbar. And Sanatana was living up the hill. The place of the Madan Mohan temple is very, very beautiful. You can imagine. I mean, you go there, you can just try to think back 500 years what it was like to stand up on that hilltop and see the Jamuna basin. And he picked a really beautiful place. Picked a very beautiful place for his bhajan. We should try to find a favorable place for our practice, and then you have to tolerate within that. Don't think, I have to tolerate, and the place becomes so unconducive. No, you have a license. find a conducive place to practice. I mean, you'll have to tolerate something within that. That's unavoidable. Here I am in a conducive place because of all of you. Still have to tolerate. I have some flu. Inevitable, unavoidable. But the deity went down and freed the merchant from the sandbar. And when he said, I'm being taken care of by this mendicant up on the hill. So when the merchant came back, he gave a good portion of the money he had earned from selling the salt to build the Madan Mohan temple. After some time, Sanatana gave the deity worship over to one of his students, I think a Krishnadas, and he established a place of bhajan for himself in Manasi Ganga at Govardhan. He was residing there for a long time. He used to circumambulate every day, and it's said that he circumambulated Govardhan Hill for two reasons. One was to go around the hill, which is something to do. It's auspicious and so forth. And so it's a form of worship. But the other was to see Raghunath Das Goswami every day and check up on him, the young Raghunath Das. He's very, very affectionate to him. So this prayer of Raghunath Das is a response to just a very extraordinary, affectionate nature of Sanatana Goswami. And as we come to the close here of our discussion, in Bhakti Ratnakar, it's said that he was the favorite devotee of all of the devotees of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who he loved all unlimitedly. You figure that out. So we have a new form of mathematics, but and his compassion very much endeared him to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Living in Vrindavan as he did for so many years, 40-some years, I think 43 years, as he aged and so forth, he would still make his way around Govardhan, check up on Raghunath Das, until Krishna told him, he appeared to him and said, you can't do this. You can't walk around the hill like this every day. You're too old. And he argued with Krishna. And Krishna manifested a stone with his footprint on it and said, just go around this every day. That'll be sufficient. Then your vow will be complete. He didn't want to break his vow. But he would wander through the forest of Braj, the villages and so forth. And the description of this is very, very beautiful. How people would come out of their houses and run up to him, children to grab his hand and so forth, and walk with him. And he would avail himself to answer to ordinary questions that they had about everyday life, to preside over and give an opinion on disputes, which his word was gold. If he said, okay, then we'll go that way. And all over Braj, he was known. So when he would approach a village, it would be, Sanatana is coming. Everyone would come out of their homes and so forth. It's just such an endearing scene to envision. And he used to keep a shaved head always. They called him Munda Baba, shaved-headed Baba. And so, to conclude, as you know, most of you, on this day, when he passed away in Braj, that we're commemorating, that coincides with the Guru Purnima, every man, woman, and child shaved their head in Vrindavan to say, we follow Sanatana. Sanatana Goswami Prabhu ki jai. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki jai. Gaudiya Vaishnava Guru Parampara ki jai. Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Gaur Premanande. Very nice to sit with you. I'm a little bit ill, as you know, but I'm getting a little better. And when I get talking like this, that's better. So keep me going would be good. And I think we have a program in the morning. The evening, we're at the temple, the ISKCON temple. So I'll be up and around as much as I can. And it's very nice to be with all of you. I'm very appreciative of all your, humbled really by all your enthusiasm for Krishna consciousness. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyo patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Ananta koti vaishnavrinda ki jai. Gaur Premanande. grandma for all these
Maharaj
things.
ki jai.